And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Renata Kiss.
And tonight, the Georgia school shooter's father is arrested.
Meanwhile, Hunter Biden pleads guilty on all counts.
And Christian schools battle discrimination in New England. Well, we begin with updates to the school shooting down in Georgia this week that left 4 people dead on Wednesday. Yesterday, police arrested the father of the suspected shooter for knowingly allowing his son to possess a weapon. He's now been charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Meanwhile, his son, that would be the shooter himself, faces 4 counts of felony murder and is set to be tried as an adult. Both of them appeared in court today. The charges against the father come as earlier this year, the parents of a school shooter in Michigan were sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. That's the first time ever that parents of a mass shooter have ever been convicted.
And yesterday, Joe Biden's son Hunter submitted a rare plea offer in a Los Angeles federal court, hoping to save his criminal case from going to trial. Special counsel David Weiss indicted the first son last year on tax evasion charges. Biden was also convicted of 3 felonies for purchasing a firearm while abusing drugs, in addition to 6 other misdemeanors. The gun felony could mean up to 25 years in prison and a maximum fine of $750,000. Since things aren't looking too good for the president's son, he has decided to plead guilty to all 9 charges using the Alford plea. This means that while the defendant could maintain his innocence, he would acknowledge the case against him and accept the penalties of his sentencing. However, it's quite rare that the DOJ would accept this kind of plea, as it is mainly reserved for the most unusual of circumstances and only through the approval of an attorney general. CBS News reports that Biden is scheduled to be sentenced in November.
And on the flip side today, Donald Trump's attorneys pleaded not guilty on his behalf yesterday to a superseding indictment in his election interference case in D.C. Yesterday's hearing was actually the first for the case since the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling back in July, which said presidents have legal immunity for their official acts. It comes as Judge Tanya Chutkin, who's overseeing this case, rejected a schedule proposed by Trump's lawyers that would have extended pretrial proceedings past the 2024 election. She said, quote, "The electoral process and the timing of the election and what needs to happen before or after an election are not relevant here," adding, quote, "This court is not concerned with an election schedule." However, Chutkin did say the issue of presidential immunity will have to be addressed before a trial date can be set.
And speaking of Trump's legal troubles, a new undercover video released by Steven Crowder's Muck Club shows a DOJ official calling the former president's indictment a perversion of justice. However, shortly after the video surfaced online, DOJ Chief of Public Affairs Nicholas Biasi retracted his comments, saying his opinion in the video did not reflect his actual views. Here's a snippet of what he said.
It's disgusting. They're just out to get him. And that's why I like the surging of the police. It's a perversion of justice. He was stacking charges and rearranging things just to make it fit a case. No, to be honest with you, I think the case is nonsense.
He added that DA Alvin Bragg is a very politically ambitious person.
Who I've known for 15 years. He used to work in my office. Before he decided to prosecute Trump, did you know who he was? You do now. I'm not sure what he wants to be, but I know he's not happy just being the DA of New York County. So Alvin's very ambitious. Every real estate person in New York does what he did. Nobody's ever been charged with this.
In his apology, Biasi claimed he only said these things to impress someone he just met who filmed him secretly. He said he was deeply sorry to the state and law enforcement officials working on these matters, and he added, "I should have known better."
And before we go to break, it does look like Elon Musk is going to be part of the Trump administration should he win in November. Yesterday, Trump announced he plans to make the Tesla CEO the head of a new government efficiency commission. Take a look.
At the suggestion of Elon Musk, who has given me his complete and total endorsement. That's nice. I will create a Government Efficiency Commission tasked with conducting a complete financial and performance audit of the entire federal government and making recommendations for drastic reforms. And Elon, because he's not very busy, has agreed to head that task force.
Now, as you heard, Trump says the idea actually came from Musk himself. He told Trump during an interview last month, quote, "I think it would be great just to have a government efficiency commission that takes a look at these things and just ensures that the taxpayers' hard-earned money is spent in a good way." Trump says the commission's first order of business will be cracking down on fraud.
In 2022, fraud and improper payments alone cost taxpayers an estimated hundreds of billions of dollars. As the first order of business, this commission will develop an action plan to totally eliminate fraud and improper payments within 6 months.
Elon Musk posted on X saying the commission is badly needed and said in a separate post that he looks forward to serving America if the opportunity arises. And up next, Netanyahu denies reports of a ceasefire deal in Gaza. We'll get the details on that and more after this.
Hi, I'm Aisha. At first, I was debating whether or not I was really pregnant and took a test. While I was waiting, they talked to me about different pregnancy choices and different options and information that helped me be more educated. To confirm, I got an ultrasound of the pregnancy test, and it was for sure positive, and I got to hear and see my baby for the first time. Hearing the heartbeat made me cry, and it was certain that I was going to keep my baby forever.
Navigating through investment options can be challenging, especially when you're determined to uphold your God-given values. Every dollar you invest is a vote for the world that you want to live in. Let your values guide your investment decisions and help to shape the culture in which we live. Become a beacon of light and pave the way with biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, where faith and finance collide. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of the investment company. This and other important information can be found in the fund's prospectus. To obtain a copy, visit timothyplan.com or call 800-846-7526. Read each prospectus carefully before investing. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal.
Fear and uncertainty can cause us to hold things tightly and rely on ourselves. But during uncertain times, as believers in Christ, we are called to surrender fully to our sovereign God. Learn a biblically responsible investment strategy proven over 25 years. Keep the money God has entrusted to you out of companies that participate in things that God detests. Fully surrender. Become a Financial Issues Partners today.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Renata Kiss. Well, let's resume our coverage with an update out of Gaza, where the United Nations says that medical teams in the territory have vaccinated 355,000 children against polio this week. It's more than half of their goal for an emergency inoculation campaign that began after the disease was detected in Gaza for the first time in 25 years. The UN estimates that there is a total of 640,000 kids in need of the vaccine. The Israeli military and Hamas are observing limited ceasefires called polio pauses to allow over 500 medical teams to move throughout the region. Those teams will now move to the hardest hit north and southern areas of the territory.
And keeping with the situation in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is putting a bit of a damper on hopes for a ceasefire and hostage deal. Appearing on Fox News yesterday, Netanyahu said recent reports that a deal is close are completely false.
Jerusalem Post is reporting that you're 90% there in negotiations with Hamas towards a ceasefire deal. Would you say that's accurate?
No, it's exactly inaccurate. There's a story, a narrative out there, there's a deal out there. In fact, while we agreed in July and in May and July and in August to a deal and to an American proposal. Hamas has consistently said no to every one of them. They don't agree to anything.
It goes against recent comments made by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who told reporters this week that 90% of a deal had been agreed to. Meanwhile, families of American hostages are getting even more desperate after 6 hostages, including an American, were killed by Hamas over the weekend. They are now reportedly urging President Biden to strike a deal without Israel.
And over in Germany, police in Munich believe they prevented an attack on the Israeli consulate yesterday. It happened on the anniversary of the deadly attack on the 1972 Munich Olympics, which saw 11 Israeli team members killed. The suspect was an 18-year-old Austrian national. He carried a long gun with a bayonet and opened fire at police officers. He was shot in the following shootout after that. Authorities said they had to assume that the timing and location near the consulate was not a coincidence, but his motive is still unknown. He was investigated in early 2023 in Austria for threats against schoolmates and a possible link to a terror organization.
Elsewhere, top military leaders from the U.S. and 50 other countries are in Germany today to discuss Ukraine's wartime needs following one of the deadliest Russian strikes of the war so far. The Pentagon says the priorities at that meeting are air defense and how to energize defense manufacturing to provide long-term support to Kyiv. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced a new $250 million security package for Ukraine earlier today.
Time is of the essence, especially with winter on its way. And we must all step up our support, and quickly. So I'm pleased to say that President Biden will announce today an additional $250 million security assistance package for Ukraine. It will surge more capabilities to meet Ukraine's evolving requirements, and will deliver them at the speed of war.
Since the war began, the nations have provided $106 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, with the U.S. alone providing over half.
And elsewhere, Russian President Vladimir Putin joked yesterday that he wants Kamala Harris to win, since President Joe Biden urged his supporters to vote for Harris, and he is one of them.
If we can name a favorite candidate, it used to be Joe Biden, but now he is not participating in the election campaign, and he recommended all his allies to support Ms. Harris. So that is what we are going to do.
Putin also commented on Harris's signature laugh, saying that she might lift U.S. sanctions on Russia if she's in such a good mood. Now, on a more serious note, he added that ultimately the election's outcome will rest in the hands of the American people, and Russia will respect that choice.
Well, her laugh, she's laughing. Her laugh is so fascinating. It means that everything is good. And if everything is good with Ms. Harris, maybe she'll refrain herself from such measures, or maybe she'll change them. So in the end, it will be the choice of the U.S. people, and we will respect this choice.
Putin's comments come after the DOJ charged 2 Russian news outlets with spreading propaganda in the U.S. and pushing the country's interests. Trump reacted to the Democrat-led Russia hoax accusations by writing on Truth Social that the Democrats are trying to say that Russia is trying to help me, which is absolutely false. In fact, President Putin would much rather see Comrade Kamala Harris in office, as he strongly said just this morning.
And speaking of those charges, we turn once again to FISM's Ian Patrick for more information on them, which relate to election interference from Russia.
The indictment against Russian state news agency RT seems to involve more than just a puppet business in the U.S. In fact, details emerging from the charges seem to show that some American influencers are involved, at least to a degree. Now, as I covered yesterday, the Justice Department issued an indictment against 2 members of Russia's RT News, alleging that they were working with the state media network to push pro-Russian messages in the American news world. This was primarily done through the use of a Tennessee-based shell company, which focused on online content creation. While the company itself was not named in the indictment, reports and investigation seem to suggest that the details closely match the description of Tenet Media, an online media company which also happens to be linked to 6 conservative influencers. Those influencers are Lauren Southern, Taylor Hanson, Matt Christensen, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, and Benny Johnson. Now, the indictment also alludes to two other figures who reportedly helped play a key role in the creation and management of this shell company. Those figures, who were not charged with anything, have been reported as being political commentator Lauren Chen and her husband Liam Donovan. Now, Chen has actually been predominantly featured on other conservative media, including both The Blaze and, at one point or another, Fox News. According to the indictment, Chen and Donovan, who are known as Founder 1 and Founder 2, were likely aware of the Russian funding and even worked to hide it from the commentators they hired. In fact, the conservative figures I previously mentioned posted statements where they affirmed that they were victims of the situation and were unaware of any Russian influence. Conservative journalist and commentator Megyn Kelly breaks down the process of what happened in a recent rendition of her namesake podcast.
The DOJ is alleging that these two Russians who worked for RT, I mean, that does matter, but it's really the fact that they're in Russia and they're Russian and they're pushing Russian interests. What they did was they called their friend Lauren Chen because, unbeknownst to me, she had worked for RT for a year as a commentator, apparently on the air, but at least writing articles for them, and said, help us form a new independent media company and help us find influencers who will work for it. And according to the indictment, she did. She and her husband both did that and recruited guys like Dave and Tim Pool and Benny and three others I never heard of. They were given misinformation by Lauren because they allege she knew they would never do this if they understood it was being funded by the Russians. She told them that it was all being funded by some French businessman, Edouard Grigorian.
Now, many Americans have since suggested that the conservative podcasters should have known something was fishy from the start. Aside from the exorbitant amount of money they were being given, some of the content pushed by Tenet was allegedly anti-Ukrainian and pro-Putin on certain occasions, especially those that might relate to the Russia-Ukraine war. Another question raised by some is why Lauren Chen and Liam Donovan haven't been indicted. After all, it seems as though their role in the situation was, at the very least, much more purposeful than the other commentators who were drawn into the fake company. Dave Ehrenberg, who is the state attorney for Palm Beach County in Florida, tells Megyn Kelly that the lack of indictments against Chen and Donovan points to something else going on potentially behind the scenes.
I think that a secret indictment is unlikely. I think that they could have cut a deal, yes. The feds are uniquely private about these things. This is something that we're different at the state level. We're public about everything. The feds do work in secret, but you have to wonder, why would they do a secret indictment? They would go ahead and they would indict, or they would be talking to them, issuing them a target letter, and then negotiating with them. Perhaps they have flipped already because it is very conspicuous by her silence.
None of the 6 commentators have been indicted, and it remains to be seen if they will be in the near future. Although, according to Ehrenberg, the government likely sees them as more of a group of useful idiots than anything else. This is Ian Patrick reporting for FISM News.
Thanks for breaking that down, Ian. It's truly an upsetting story right there. And still in the same vein of thought, Iran is accelerating a propaganda campaign targeting former President Donald Trump's election campaign. According to the New York Times on Wednesday, Iran's disinformation strategy is more varied and ambitious this year than in previous election seasons. It relies on social media accounts to spread false narratives and threats. However, they also built elaborate news websites to give the reports a legitimate appearance. The efforts also saw Iranian-linked hackers compromise the email account of Trump advisor Roger Stone this summer. Attorney General Merrick Garland similarly accused Iran of brazen electoral interference on Wednesday.
As the U.S. intelligence community noted 2 weeks ago, we have observed increasingly aggressive Iranian activity during this election cycle. That includes recently reported activities by Iran to compromise former President Trump's campaign and to avoid an election outcome that it regards as against its interests.
He went on to say that Iranian-linked hackers have targeted campaign aides in both parties. He pledged to be relentlessly aggressive to counteract the malign foreign influence. And we have plenty more news coming up next. We'll be right back after a moment in history.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In our march through history, we cross the Atlantic and travel nearly 2,000 years back to the 1st century AD during the apostolic age of the Christian Church. In the year 60 AD, the Apostle Paul, the second most influential figure in Christianity after Jesus Christ, was shipwrecked on the Mediterranean Sea on the remote island of Malta. Paul had once been a Jewish Pharisee and a murderer of Christians before his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, several years after the resurrection of Jesus. After many years of evangelism and several imprisonments, Paul was once again arrested for his faithful and continuous preaching of the gospel in the Roman Empire. Now, according to Acts 27, Paul was imprisoned aboard a ship headed for Rome. On board with Paul were his prison guard, a centurion named Julius, as well as his companion and fellow prisoner Luke. After making several stops along several eastern Mediterranean port cities, the ship was caught in a storm and ran aground just off the coast of Malta, about 60 miles south of Sicily. Miraculously, the crew survived. Almost immediately after their arrival to shore, Paul survived another danger when he was bit by a venomous viper, but suffered no harm. Many would have called it a day and taken a rest, but not Paul. The book of Acts tells us he immediately visited one of the locals who was very ill, laid hands on him, and healed him of his sickness by the power of Jesus Christ. The Apostle Paul eventually made it to Rome, where he continued to share the good news 2 years before his release in 62 AD. During this first imprisonment in Rome, he would write 4 New Testament epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Are you tired of the chaos? There are a lot of things that make noise, but only a few that truly matter. As a parent, I want to leave something that will last for a long time.
You invest $300 a month interest on slowly by the time you retire.
Not just an inheritance of money, but a legacy of godly values.
Here at Financial Issues, we want to help you grow your money, but our main goal is to help you honor God with the money that He's given you.
Invest your money in a God-honoring way. Go to financialissues.org.
I was sobbing. It was a cry for prayer for God. I'm so sorry, please. So I got on the internet and I just started seeing like abortion pill reversal, and I found a hotline number. We're gonna get this started. It's gonna seem like a lot, but it's gonna be so fast, and it's because you only have a certain amount of time left. It's gonna be okay. We got this. We're gonna try to fix this for you and make sure you know you're good and the baby's good. Don't worry. And when I came here, my heart was so warm. Other than Planned Parenthood, where I was very cold and I was lost, and I just felt like I could have been, it was just terrible. And to know that Compass Care could tell me something different and get reverse a medication like that, that's amazing. That somebody would go as hard as if it was their children to make sure your child is gonna be alive and stay safe. So I want a lot of people to know it's possible. You can save your baby. You can reverse that abortion.
All right, and welcome back once again to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We're going to kick off this segment in New York City, where the FBI has now raided the homes of Police Commissioner Edward Caban, along with the top aides to Mayor Eric Adams on Wednesday. Federal authorities are believed to be investigating dealings between the mayor's campaign and Turkey, as the mayor has now seen 8 of his aides raided by federal agents since November, when allegations of a kickback scheme between City Hall and the Turkish government first began. Adams is a former NYPD captain himself, and the raids have frequently targeted current and former police officials. However, no police have been accused of any crime as of yet.
Meanwhile, in culture, New England Christian schools still fight against unfair discrimination from state programs. Crosspoint Church, owner of Vermont and Bangor Christian Schools, is submitting appeals to 2 lower courts that they say have not applied appropriate severity to laws that infringe on freedom of religion. According to the Institute for Justice, the courts have essentially turned a blind eye to the misconduct of other branches. The 2 schools' complaints revolve around gender, sexual identity, and religious discrimination. discrimination. Vermont Christian School accused the state of kicking it out of sports leagues after the institution protested trans women's participation in women's sports. Meanwhile, Bangor Christian School in Maine wants to challenge the state's 40-year law that refuses town tuition programs to families that wish to send their kids to conservative Christian schools. Justice Samuel Alito says Maine encourages watered-down religion by only supporting those institutions that align with the state's values.
Very troubling indeed. Meanwhile, Republicans are continuing to scrutinize Tim Walz. The Republican National Committee and the Minnesota GOP are now demanding to know how non-citizens that is, ever made it onto the state's voter rolls in the state of Minnesota. Together, they notified the administration, that would be Tim Walz's administration as governor, last month about a non-citizen legally living in the country who came forward saying they received a primary ballot in the mail despite never actually registering to vote. The Minnesota Department of Public Safety Commissioner responded to that, saying the department takes many steps to ensure that only U.S. citizens' information is forwarded to the offices of the Secretary of State, and also said they are now conducting a thorough manual review of their records. However, the RNC and the state GOP called this a non-answer, while also blaming the state's automatic voter registration program for the problem.
And to close out on a slightly more humorous note, CNN has called out Kamala Harris for using a section of Trump's border wall in one of her campaign ads. Here is a snippet of that.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border.
CNN exposed her hypocrisy with a quote from Harris's 2019 book titled The Truths We Hold, where the vice president said she was against Trump's border policy. Harris wrote, quote, "There was a bigger reason to oppose the border wall. A useless wall on the southern border would be nothing more than a symbol, a monument standing in opposition to not just everything I value, but to the fundamental values upon which this country was built. How could I vote to build what would be little more than a monument designed to send the cold, hard message, keep out?" CNN's K-File senior editor Andrew Kaczynski said he and his team found 50 instances where Harris denied the importance of a border wall.
Found more than 50 of those tweets criticizing the border wall before she used that in her ad. And I want people to take a look at just a few of what she said here. She called it wasteful, useless, a waste of taxpayer money, a vanity wall project, a wasteful border wall, a stupid wall, a medieval vanity project, and an unnecessary wall.
And sadly, this has been par for the course for her campaign, where she keeps flipping on issues again and again to appear more moderate, especially to appeal to those swing state voters.
Yeah, she has shown her true colors for sure.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's our program for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for more updates over the weekend, you can follow us on social media at FISM News, or you can also download the FISM app right to your smartphone. Thanks so much, God bless, and we'll see you on Monday with more news coverage.